The senator from Delaware.
Madam President, are we in a quorum call?
No, we're not.
Oh, good. I appreciate the opportunity to come to the floor. And this is like what they call in Delaware a three for one. And I appreciate the cooperation of this floor staff and you to enable me to do this. One of the things I always look for when I'm thinking about hiring somebody is I ask for recommendations or reference of people that they've worked for in the past. And as it turns out, in the nomination of Dr. Colleen Shogan to be the Archivist of the United States, one of the people she used to work for was Senator Joe Lieberman, a good friend to all of us, many Democrats and Republicans. And he was good enough to reach out to me several weeks ago, and we had just had a hearing on Dr. Shogan before us in the Homeland Security Committee. I was really impressed. He called and said, she used to work for me. And I said, no kidding? Well, I said, I wouldn't disqualify her for that. I was just kidding. But he went on to tell me what just a remarkable human being was, even at a younger age in her life. But as the chief administrator of the National Archives and Records Administration, the Archivist of the United States plays a vital role in a couple of different ways. One, especially with the preservation of the history of this country that we're all sworn to protect. This person who's been nominated as nominee would serve as our nation's record keeper for executive agencies and for presidential records, while also being responsible for the management of the National Archives and Records Administration. This role has been critical in leading the federal government's ongoing transition from paper to electronic records for a long time. Dr. Shogan is extremely well qualified to take on what is not a small responsibility. It's a great responsibility, and an important one too. As a senior vice president and director of the David M. Rubenstein Center for White House History at the White House Historical Association, Dr. Shogan has already demonstrated her extensive skill set as an archivist. She's a dedicated public servant, holding a decade's worth of senior roles at the Library of Congress and developing a career in academia, federal government service, and nonprofit management. And one of those folks that she worked for was our former colleague, Senator Joe Lieberman. At our hearing to consider her nomination on the hearing before the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee earlier this year, Dr. Shogan reaffirmed her commitment to nonpartisanship, very important for this role. And she highlighted her service as the vice chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. Dr. Shogan also shared how she will work to address the backlog of veterans record requests at the National Archives and Record Administration. As the last Vietnam veteran serving here in the United States Senate, that means a lot to me. But she's also vowed to make sure that the oftentimes long and arduous process that can prevent our veterans from receiving the critical services and benefits that they are entitled to, that they are addressed. I strongly urge my colleagues to confirm Dr. Shogan as the Archivist of the United States, and I know she will serve our country well. And my talking points say now I'm going to yield the floor, but I'm not, because I've been asked by the folks who help us manage the floor if I'd like to go ahead and speak on two CRAs and with these Congressional Review Act resolutions. And I would like to do that if I may, and I appreciate the tolerance and consideration of the chairman of our committee. The first one, this is an unlikely one. Let me just say, Delaware has a very strong ag industry. If you look at the key industries in Delaware, number one, a lot of people think it's banking, it's chemicals and stuff like that. Number one is agriculture. It's been agriculture for as long as I've lived in the first state. And we raise a lot of chickens, we raise a lot of other things as well. And one of the creatures that helps us best in managing the battle against pests in our state, and it turns out in over 35 other states, is an unlikely creature called the long-eared bat. And what I want to do today is to talk about the resolution that's being offered by our friends on the other side to reverse a critical habitat designation under the Endangered Species Act with respect to this listing of the northern long-eared bat as an endangered species. Madam President, last week I came to the floor, you may recall, of this chamber to defend science-based protections for the lesser prairie chicken. And as I said then, that species has long been considered an important indicator of the health of American grasslands and prairies. Today I rise in opposition to two new Congressional Record Act resolutions which would revoke science-based rules under the Endangered Species Act. Simply put, the Endangered Species Act is our best tool to address biodiversity loss in the United States, and we know that biodiversity is worth preserving for many reasons, whether it be to protect human health because of a moral imperative or to be good stewards for our one and only planet. The first resolution that we're going to consider would reinstate a rule from the Trump administration which limited the ability of the National Marine Fisheries Services and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to designate critical habitat based on best available science. Now, what's critical habitat, some might ask? Well, one, they are areas that our federal agencies identify as keys to the recovery of threatened and endangered species. The agencies subsequently propose these areas for protection, and the habitat becomes the focus of conservation areas. The Trump-era rule, however, a rule that the CRA resolution would reinstate was especially damaging for species that are in peril due to climate change. The rule prevented the relevant federal agencies from designating critical habitat in areas that are not currently suitable habitat but could be in the future. For example, when a species habitat range shifts as a result of climate change, our federal wildlife protection agencies may need to account for this shift when they decide what potential habitat we should protect to support their long-term recovery. The number of imperiled species is growing, not diminishing, and more species are harmed by climate change, which, as we know, is getting becoming more and more serious as the days go by. But that's why our federal agencies need more, not less, flexibility to designate and protect habitat. That's the first resolution, SJ Res 23. Second resolution we're considering today would overturn another science-based rule reclassifying the northern long-eared bat from threatened to endangered species status. Most of us never heard of the northern long-eared bat. We don't even think they exist. Well, they do in 37 states. And they're really good at one thing, eating pests, eating insects. And not just there's actually a dollar value that's been put on what they do, the contribution they make to agriculture in my state and 30-some other states. And the amount of money is over maybe $4 billion a year. Over $3 or $4 billion a year. But these bats are found in 37 states from far east as Maine down the eastern seaboard, including Delaware, all the way down to Louisiana. Unfortunately, there's a disease called white nose syndrome. Some people may have never heard of this bat, but they've heard of white nose syndrome. But it's spread across, listen to this, nearly 80% of the bat's habitat range in recent years. Data shows the white nose syndrome has get this, they've killed some 97 to 100% of northern long-eared bats in infected colonies. That, in addition to other factors like habitat loss and climate change, has contributed to this important species decline. Bats, again, I'll reiterate this, bats, including the northern long-eared bat, contribute to an estimated $3 to $4 billion annually. I've actually heard it listed as high as tens of billions of dollars to our nation's agricultural economy. In any event, it's a lot. And it's all over the country. This is a value that impacts us, our farmers all over the country. But these bats basically provide this service primarily through pest control and through pollination. The Biden rule not only helps northern long-eared bats, but also supports other bat species that are in decline due to white nose syndrome. By protecting the species, we are protecting our farmers, our agricultural communities, and the revenues that they depend on. To that end, CRA resolutions that undermine the endangered species and more generally science are, in my view, a dangerous diversion from the real work of protecting our environment and, for that matter, our economy. As a recovering governor from a state that has a little state but a big agricultural economy, And as the current chairman of the Environment Public Works Committee, I believe we can protect our environment, including the species with which we share our planet, while supporting economic development and job creation. And it's my hope that we can work together in ways to support these goals in a truly bipartisan fashion. With that in mind, I oppose the two resolutions I've talked about, SJ-Res 23 and SJ-Res 24. I invite all of our colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to join me in opposing them. And with that,